like I said, we had low voter turnout here in Bexar County. Was there low voter turnout throughout the state of Texas?
We saw well, let me say, all across Texas, turnout was lower than it was 4 years ago in 2018, and there are a variety of reasons for that. In 2018, you had a U.S. Senate race on the ballot, and we just didn't in Texas this time around. And if you think about the environment in the rest of the country, you did have these key Senate races that were highly watched by people all over the nation. These races in Pennsylvania, Arizona, and places like Nevada as well, where each of those could be said to be the Senate race that's going to determine the balance of power in Washington. We didn't have any race like that. Our races in Texas were more of a family affair. Only people in Texas really care about who the governor is going to be here and what's going to happen with our congressional delegation specifically, and the races that were competitive here in the legislature. Those are things that only Texans really care about. In talking to people running campaigns all over the state, Republican and Democratic campaigns, they were telling me throughout the election cycle that when they would talk to voters, voters would tell them that they are disgusted with politics right now, that it's always something about owning the libs or screaming about the conservatives about whatever it is. And if you were an optimist like you or I, you might think that a person's reaction to that would be to say, hey, why don't I get in there and vote and make some change for the better? But instead, a normal human reaction is to see something disgusted and something that's disgusting and be turned off by it and not want anything to do with it. And that's one huge reason for the low voter turnout in Bexar County and other places across the state. And I can tell you, for all the debates that we have about voter suppression, that negativity and that nastiness of politics is one of the biggest voter suppression things that there is.
That makes sense.
How's that for a common sense answer? How people are grossed out by it. Go ahead.
Everybody. Then I guess, I know in Bexar County, there was more registered voters, even though the voter turnout was low. Would you say that that's also something we saw across the state?
It is, we saw about 17 million people who are registered to vote in Texas now, and we had less than 8 million people vote in the election. Eligible voters in Texas would be a much higher number than 17 million. There's just, you have a lot of people who have not bothered to register to vote. There have been, significant efforts by Republicans and Democrats to register voters, but you also have to keep in mind that a lot of people get registered when they move here. When they get a driver's license, they go ahead and sign up for, being registered to vote. They check the box. And so there are a lot of people who are just relocations. And remember, in Texas, even during the height of pandemic restrictions in 2020, we still had more than 1,000 people moving to this state every single day. That's still the case. And so they're moving to places like Bexar County, Comal County. You've got the suburban counties and the big urban counties where people are headed to. And so just because they've moved here doesn't mean that they're going to get involved in our nasty politics.
What is Bexar County being all blue? Does that mean anything for the rest of the state? Is that noteworthy? I mean, I know we've been historically blue, but it was just such a locked Democrat winnings here. So
yeah, look, I think, and this might upset my friends in San Antonio, but I think the better analogy might be that if you look at Houston, that's the future of Texas, and Texas is the future of America. And the reason for that is if you look at the races in Houston and Harris County, they were very close. The Democrats are still dominating the politics in Houston, but the county judge's race saw tremendous spending there, and you saw the Democratic incumbent barely hold on, but the numbers just can't be overcome for the Republicans in Houston, which is such a diverse place, like Bexar County is as well. And I think for those diverse metro and suburban counties like Bexar County, like Comal County, and some of the others around you, you do have those real battlegrounds forming for what we're going to see going forward in Texas. Let me say it another way. If we're talking Bexar County specifically, one of my colleagues likes to say that in Texas, we have a blue spine along the I-35 corridor. If you look at the growth in the Democratic numbers from Laredo all the way to DFW, that is the kind of thing that Republicans are now having to work against if they want to hold on to statewide offices. So if you look at the overall strategy from Republicans, what they're doing right now in the Valley is spending a lot of money down there to try to win some races and also boost their numbers statewide. One reason to do that, a big reason to do that, is because Republicans are losing ground in places like Bexar County and the suburban counties. And in suburban Texas, the growth of the Democratic vote in places like Williamson County and Hayes County, Denton County, Fort Bend County, and all of those suburban counties, it's got to be overcome somehow for Republicans. So they've gone one more place that they can find conservative voters, and that's down along the Rio Grande.
let's talk about that. I mean, they were really hoping that it would just be red along the border, and that's not what
Yeah, yeah.
happened. So talk about
Mhm.
why you think that didn't happen.
Republicans who are working on campaigns in South Texas, broadly and in the Valley specifically, would tell you privately that trying to flip those counties to Republican is really, really hard. And a big reason for that is because you have people who have traditionally voted for Democrats, even though they are, in a large sense, pretty conservative voters. But it's difficult to target people in campaigns to try to get them to get out the vote for Republicans when they've traditionally voted for Democrats. One thing that campaigns will do when they're targeting voters is they'll look at their past primary history and they'll say, look, this person has voted in 1 or 2 or 3 Democratic primaries or in Republican primaries. Well, when you're trying to get somebody to stop doing that and move over to your party instead, you're working with incomplete data. You're not exactly sure who those people would be that would be willing to vote for the other party. And so, look, Republicans made gains there for sure. The state Senate race down there that was pretty close. It was within about 500 votes. The state Senate seat, the district runs from Corpus Christi down to Brownsville. Very competitive for the Republicans. They couldn't quite get there, and there may even be a recount in that. We'll keep an eye on that. Could get pretty interesting down there. But look, the fact is that no matter where you're campaigning, whether it's in San Antonio or the Valley, Houston, Austin, wherever, the fundamentals of campaigns don't change. You got to have 3 basic things. 1 is a good candidate. 2 is a clear message. And 3 is a lot of money so that people even notice those first 2 things. And Republicans are spending a ton of money in the Valley to make a real investment to try to shore up their numbers statewide going forward.
Okay. And then because of these efforts from Republicans, they're shifting gears. I mean, is the politics changing? Like, I always think of like the major cities always being blue and then the rest being red, but is any of that actually changing? And if so, like where and what?
I think it's changing in this way, in the way that cities and suburban counties are becoming more Democratic, and our rural areas in Texas are becoming more and more Republican. In some ways, and this might be counterintuitive, it was a bad idea for Beto O'Rourke to go campaign in rural Texas because he was offending a lot of people in those places who would never, ever vote for him anyway. And in some places, driving the Republican vote up from, a county where 75% of voters had voted for Republicans up to 80% of Republicans Republicans getting 80% of the support there, and not focusing more on the urban cores, where you do have the population growth that at some point is going to tip the scales for Democrats. I'm not sure what cycle that's going to happen. It could be in 2 years. It could be more likely in 4 years. But we'll see. But I do think that what you're seeing is an intensification of the partisan structure of those areas, if that makes sense. In places like Houston and San Antonio, it's getting more Democratic, and in the suburbs in Fort Bend County and Comal County, places like that, it's getting more Democratic as well. Rural Texas, if it was its own state, would be redder than Oklahoma, where every county voted to put Sarah Palin 1 heartbeat away from the presidency.
How do we think the state legislature is going to look? Was there anything that changed in the House or the Senate? I saw your tweet that there was more women.
Yeah.
Wait,
Thinking about that, after last night, after the election, there's not going to be much change at all in the partisan makeup of the legislature. There's going to be about the same number of Republicans and Democrats in both the Texas House and the Texas Senate. I think when it's all said and done, Republicans will have added 1 seat in both chambers. So I don't expect to see much difference in the leadership style, although I do think that it's worth noting, as Speaker Phelan noted this morning, he said, look, we did do some work to double the number of Republican women who will be in the House. I can tell you that when there are more women in a legislative body, it changes the work product. It's more of a collaborative effort than an adversarial one, for sure. But I do think that there may be some refocusing of priorities for the legislature. I know that a couple of things are going to rise to the top. There are three main things that I keep hearing about that the legislature is really going to tackle. Those are property taxes and some kind of relief for homeowners and for property taxpayers at large. Also, immigration and border security, which is always a huge issue at the legislature. There's no amount of money that they can spend, it seems, that's enough when it comes to border security. And also, there may be a push for district attorney reform, is what it's being called. And what that has to do with is recall elections of quote unquote liberal district attorneys and judges. Like you saw in California, it's very ironic. The Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, often says that we don't want Texas to become like California. But California is where they do have recall elections of district attorneys. And you saw that happen in San Francisco, where even the Democrats in San Francisco thought that their DA was too liberal. There are some Republicans here who want to do the same thing in Texas, although I think that's going to be a heavy lift because it would be a state constitutional amendment. That means they would have to get some Democrats to vote for that, because that takes a 2/3 vote of both the House and Senate. So I don't think that they'll get there, but that is going to be one of those things that's going to be hotly debated next year, I think.
Okay, and then the last question that I have is Uvalde voted for Abbott, which was confusing,
Did that surprise you?
upsetting.
Did that surprise you?
No,
Did you know about it?
because
Right.
it's just a rural area. That's in my opinion. That's mine, just top off the head. But what do you think about that?
I was talking with some people from Uvalde about that a few days before the election, and one woman from Uvalde told me that she thought that the families of the victims should absolutely have the right to say whatever they want and should pursue change however they want. But this person was telling me that what they want does not represent the community. It's a very conservative area. It's an area that went for Donald Trump. It's a Republican area and has been for quite some time. And so in seeing the results, I think it might be surprising to some people, because the only voices that folks have been hearing from Uvalde are the people who were hurt the most by what happened that day. Very emotional for those people. And I don't think that any of them ever expected to be political activists ever. I was sort of surprised the degree to which some of them got involved in a partisan campaign for governor. I don't think I've seen that before. Usually after one of these shootings, you will see the families, become active in trying to make some change at their legislature or in Congress, but you don't usually see them get so involved in a campaign, which some of them did for Beto O'Rourke. And of course, they have every right to do that. But that doesn't mean that they represent the overall attitudes of people in that area.